I mean, what are these guys talking about?
By your own admission, you just say you're not likely to get Republican votes for the tax increase. You're not likely to get Republican votes for H.R. 1, expanding voting rights, or the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. So aren't you going to have to choose? I know you've been reluctant to do away with the filibuster. Aren't you going to have to choose between preserving the filibuster and advancing your agenda?
Yes. But here's the choice. I don't think you have to eliminate the filibuster. You have to do it what it used to be when I first got to the Senate and back in the old days when you used to be around there. And that is that a filibuster, you had to stand up and command the floor. And you had to keep talking alone. You couldn't call for, no one could say, quorum call. Once you stopped talking, you lost that, and someone could move in and say, I moved the question of. So you got to work for the filibuster.
So you're for that reform. You're for bringing back the talking filibuster.
I am. That's what it was supposed to be. Look, I think, don't hold me to the numbers, George, but I think between 1960 and 2000, there were like, I'm making this number up, I don't know. There were like, 50 filibusters. And now they're like 200 since then. Since that
just put a hold
changed.
on it, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, so the idea, it almost is getting to the point where there's, democracy's having a hard time functioning. And so, look, I'm not saying this is going to be easy, George, but I do believe there's enough Republicans over time who are going to have, look,
they haven't had that epiphany you said you were going to see in the campaign.
No, well, I've only been here 6 weeks, pal. Okay, give me a break. Been here 6 weeks. I think the epiphany is going to come between now and 2022. This is there's 78% of the people say they support this program. 52% of Republicans. Let's assume it's off by 15%. You're going to go home and campaign. Republican voters want that $1,500 because they're in trouble. Republican voters want to be able to choose between being able to go to work and send their kid to a daycare that they can afford. Republican voters want to be able to take care of a child care tax credit. I mean, it's not like every Republican voter is a billionaire. And by the way, and I'm not saying I'll do it again, but I won those Republican voters in suburbia.
For the first time, Joe Biden's announced that he is in favor of reforms on the filibuster, the implications of which cannot be overstated. So here's how it works right now. If a senator wants to object to a certain piece of legislation, all it takes is for them to register an objection, to declare that they're objecting without having to actually do anything to object. They don't need to hold the floor, they don't need to talk for 25 straight hours, they just need to basically signal that they are filibustering, and that counts as the filibuster, meaning they can block an entire piece of legislation without having to actually explain why they're blocking that legislation. The way to overcome that filibuster is by invoking cloture, which requires 3/5 of the Senate, or 60 votes. So because a filibuster is as easy as just saying you're filibustering without actually doing any of the dirty work required, that 60-vote bar has become the de facto threshold. However, if the filibuster came back in the form of having to hold the floor, that would mean that senators would have to actually work to sustain that filibuster. And that could go on for hours or days, but the onus would be on them to sustain it. And once they finish, when no senator is on the floor anymore, the period of debate would be closed, and the majority leader, meaning Chuck Schumer, would then schedule a simple majority cloture vote on the bill. Because remember, the 60-vote threshold is to break a filibuster. But if the filibuster actually plays out in the form of a senator holding the floor, then there's no need to garner 60 votes to break the filibuster, just a simple majority to move forward after the filibuster is finished. And then the Senate would only need a simple majority vote on the legislation itself, meaning the kiss of death that is the 60-vote threshold would no longer be a requirement. As it stands right now, the minority party, the Republicans, can simply register an objection, and that's it. Meanwhile, the majority party, the Democrats, need a massive 60 votes to overcome that objection. But there's no reason that the party in power should be at the mercy of the party not in power. This reform would change that. It would place the onus on the Republicans to explain their position and actually hold the floor and carry out their objections and put them in the position to work to block something, not the Democrats in the position to work to overcome that obstruction. That is a desperately needed change. And it couldn't come a moment too soon, because yes, there is a ton of progressive legislation that enjoys overwhelming popularity across the US, legislation like the Universal Background Checks Act, and a path to citizenship for Dreamers, and the PRO Act for unions, and codifying protections for women's reproductive rights. All of that is massively important, but the most important reason the filibuster needs reform right now is for H.R. 1, the For the People Act. Act. Why? Because our democracy is under attack by Republicans in states across the country seeking to literally legislate Democrats out of government. There are voter suppression bills in a number of states targeting young and brown and black voters, all of whom tend to vote for Democrats. Congressional districts will be gerrymandered to pack Democratic voters into as few districts as possible so as to maximize the number of Republicans in the House. Sunday voting will be curtailed to minimize the voting impacts of black churchgoers. Voter purges that have been shown to target voters with non-white sounding names or from Democratic-leaning zip codes will continue to be the norm. The list goes on and on. But all of it represents an overtly anti-democratic effort by Republicans to stop people from voting. So if something isn't done to block these bills from taking effect, then it'll be too late, and Democrats won't even have the opportunity to pass any legislation because they'll already be legislated out of government. And by the way, Biden's announcement is even more potent considering that the staunchest advocate of the filibuster in the Senate, Joe Manchin, has said the same thing. Only days ago, Manchin said that although he wouldn't eliminate the filibuster, he'd be interested in reforming it.
You consider going back to the old filibuster, sort of like Mr. Smith goes to Washington and Jimmy Stewart, where you want a filibuster, it's not an automatic 60 votes, you got to stay on the Senate floor and keep talking.
The filibuster should be painful. It really should be painful, and we've made it more comfortable over the years. Not intentionally, maybe it evolved into that. Maybe it has to be more painful. Maybe you have to stand there. There's things we can talk about.
Meaning that if the two biggest Democratic proponents of the filibuster, Manchin and Biden, are both in support of reforming it, then the likelihood of filibuster reform just went from an improbability to, hopefully, an inevitability. That is good news if you're a fan of, democracy. Of course, that didn't stop McConnell from lobbing baseless threats about this very issue from the floor of the Senate.
As soon as Republicans wound up back in the saddle, we wouldn't just erase every liberal change that hurt the country. We'd strengthen America with all kinds of conservative policies with zero input from the other side. How about this? Nationwide right to work for working Americans. Defunding Planned Parenthood in sanctuary cities on day one. A whole new era of domestic energy production. Sweeping new protections for conscience and the right to life of the unborn. Concealed carry reciprocity in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. Massive hardening of security on our southern border.
But here's the thing. While McConnell claims that this will come back to bite Democrats, if McConnell wanted the legislative filibuster eliminated, he'd have eliminated it. He already made it so that he'd need a simple majority for Supreme Court justices and for his precious tax cuts. But he knows that filibuster reform means that we can pass H.R. 1, which means he won't be able to suppress and gerrymander his way back into the majority in the House and Senate. And that is what McConnell is afraid of. His threats are evidence that democracy would prevail, and McConnell hates the thought of that. So find solace in the fact that Biden's announcement is a really good sign, not just for passing much-needed legislation to improve the lives of countless Americans, but to save democracy from a Republican Party hell-bent on suffocating it. To see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and click the notification bell. And please subscribe to my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I not only break down the biggest stories of the week, but I also interview major players in the world of politics, including Vice President Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Nancy Pelosi, Katie Porter, Pete Buttigieg, Cory Booker, Jamie Raskin, and many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.